Hello and welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. A2RC here. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start a new adventure with me. Today we have the purple RS4 in front of you today. If you recall, a couple episodes ago I talked about this OS 15CV having an issue. The carburetor needs a full rebuild or replace, and as you recall, I have a brand new carb that I am going to be installing on the engine. But first and foremost, we have to get the engine out. We're going to do a little bit of chassis work to take the engine out, take off the linkage. We're going to take a quick overview. This particular episode is not going to be a full overview and tear down and history of the engine. Actually, we'll have a later episode sometime in the future on some other OS engines, and we'll have a different 15 CVR that we're going to take a look at, do a full overview, break down some history on. But this one we are going to take apart, and we're going to take a look and see how this almost 19-year-old engine, I bought and installed this engine for this chassis back in 2004. It's been out a couple times for a few refresh, some bearings, etc. But it's still running off the original internals, so we're going to take a look. For whatever odd reason, we do things we all do in the hobby a little bit differently. The last time I reinstalled this, I used Phillips panhead screws or bolts. We're going to be replacing those finally. I did the same thing down below for the engine mounts. Not entirely sure why, but we will be replacing those with some more appropriate hardware. And what's good to know is that we do not know, of course, the level or the amount of pinch. What I do know is that we do have good compression, and we know that the engine runs pretty well outside of the little bit of high idle and two-stage idle because of the carb issues. So we're hoping with a brand new carb on there, and hopefully we can get away with just cleaning up and maybe some new bearings in this 15 CVR, we'll be able to get her back on the road again and enjoying life. So we're going to take the engine out here, and then we're going to go over to the engine stand and start breaking down the engine. Notice this is a slide carb, and it uses the traditional placement of the throttle servo. Traditional or standard style for the brake lever, and then we have a slightly modified link for the throttle itself. We should be able to leave the Y brace on, but sometimes you can't. And with this RRP static brake disc in here, we may not be able to slip the flywheel out and around. We might have to take off the Y brace, but we're going to try first. We're not going to be able to take off the header right now the way that it's installed. So we'll disconnect it, we'll flip the engine over. So now that we have those lower bolts off, see if we can wiggle this out, and we can. So relatively clean, but of course, yes, she does have some dirt. We've got the 2-speed clutch bell. We've got Robinson Racing non-pull start, so the bump start lightweight flywheel on here. Let's go over to the engine stand and take off some additional components. So now that we're over here at the engine stand, we're going to take a little overview, a look at this OS 15 CVR. Again, it's been installed in the purple RS4 for over 19 years now. Again, this is the V2 version of the Ron Paris pipe. We actually have an OFNA header. We've got the low profile bump start HPI heatsink style engine mounts. Purple Robinson Racing lightened bump start flywheel. We've got the 2-speed bell on here. This is a 13 by 20. You can see that, of course, it is dirty, but we'll be able to clean this up in the time. The biggest issue here is the carb, like I mentioned, but we have a brand new 10C slide carb, new in package from OS, that we're going to be putting on this engine after we get it fully refreshed and fix the idling issue, the 2-stage idle issue, and go from there. We're going to take a look at the internals and see if we have any pinch left on this engine, but more than likely we're going to be replacing bearings at minimum. Notice that we still have, I'm trying to rotate the flywheel, we still have good compression. The pinch might be minimal after all this time, but we know at least the engine runs well outside of the carb issue. And so I'm hoping that we can replace some bearings, clean everything up, do a full refresh on it, and get it back installed where it belongs. Let's take a look here at the carb. Notice that idle set screw has been broken off. More than likely I will not be able to extract that without ruining the body. That's why I sourced another 10C carb. This was pretty hard to find, and I thought I was out of luck, and lo and behold, go to one of my local hobby stores and they have, old parts in the back. Look through the bin, and this brand new 10C carb was in there. The bad part though is this particular local store doesn't discount any older parts, so I still had to pay full retail, but I was happy to do so to be able to get the brand new carburetor. So let's set that to the side. Notice here we have an older idea on trying to protect the engine from road rash, and that's some zip ties. Notice the head is in pretty good shape still, and yep, we have had some rollovers over the years, but with a good set of zip ties, it's protected the head well. Also note, when we take this apart, we're not going to be doing a full overview of the engine. We're actually going to do that at another time with a different brand new OS 15 CVR. But I'm not going to be too worried about dust and dirt getting down inside of the engine right now, because we're going to do a full clean, a full refresh eventually, and get this engine back up and going. So let's go ahead and pop off this exhaust, take off the clutch bell, flywheel, engine mounts, head, and do this disassembly. Take out what we can, take a look at the bearings while I have you here with us, and have a fun conversation about some stuff along the way. This particular header, I had to put a through bolt on with some nuts, because this header long ago, many years ago, started to strip out on me, but not too big a deal. Just hold on to this nut. So yes, over the years, this has seen a lot of runtime. but it's still relatively healthy. When we go to put this back on, we're going to put a new gasket on, clean up the entire exhaust before we put it back onto the car. Let's take off these zip ties so we can access the head bolts. If you're curious, these are flat style cutters. They're not normal dikes or wire cutters. When you use these, you can get very close to the end of where you're snipping, and it does a nice clean cut. I recommend getting a pair of these for yourself for normal snips or anything that you might want to cut. They're only intended, I believe, for soft materials like plastic. Maybe there's different brands that you can use for copper and different things, but I just solely use these for plastic zip ties. There's the top of the head there. Go ahead and loosen up this clutch bell. A lot of times you want to try to hold your flywheel with something. I like to try to use just my fingers at first in hopes that I don't have to put some type of plier or some other way of holding the flywheel if you don't have to. If you have some soft grips that work well, go ahead, but I try not to hold on to the flywheel if I do not have to. And even with Loctite and a tight grip, sometimes the glove helps. You're able to break that loose. And this is just a Phillips style screw that'll be replaced with a hex style when it goes back together. Sometimes the Loctite and dirt and grime hold that bearing in place, and you just need to give it a little bit of wiggle. But I like to use flange bearings here on the end. Notice it's nice and clean inside. We'll still give it a wash before it goes back together. And I like to use ball bearings in replace of the needle bearing. I'll give these a little measure so that you know what size they are. So you measure the ID first. This is a 5, then the OD, an 8, and I believe 2.5. You have 2.5 mil. And so just depending on what your spacing needs or what you prefer will depend on how many you need to put on the 2-speed shaft here. I like to put a shim or a spacer on the back. Sometimes I've heard that that's preference by people, but that's what I prefer to do. And so not including the outside bearing, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 internal bearings on the pilot shaft, and an additional one here for the bell. This is the HPI's race style adjustable composite clutch. Most of the time on all the RS4s, I like to run it on that middle setting. It doesn't allow the engine to rev up real high before catching, but also it doesn't catch immediately. And so for most all the engines, that's what has worked well for me throughout all the years. And so that's what I continue to do. It just slides off here. Here's the back side. There's a constant spring. And we will wash this up, but it looks like there's still a good amount of life left on this clutch, which is great. I believe this is the second clutch only that I've had on this engine, and so they last a pretty darn good long time. So we have the 2-speed longer style pilot shaft. This is a 2-shoe style clutch. And there's been some controversy that I've read recently on if you're supposed to use a flywheel wrench like this. This is the older style Wolfpack simple style 2 and 3 shoe flywheel wrench, but I've used this so many years and it's worked so well. The controversy sometimes is if you're going to damage or bend the shoe pins. I've never experienced that myself. I'm not saying that it can't or won't happen, but as long as you get a quality flywheel that has additional, quality pins and hardware, I don't think you're going to go wrong. But what that does is the wrench goes around the 2 pins, and you go ahead and use an 8mm socket or your glow wrench that has a 5/16 or 8mm size on it to take this off. So we have our 8mm socket and ratchet here. Let's go ahead and put on our flywheel wrench. This is Loctite on there. Hold it and take off your pilot nut. So there it is. Notice the shaft itself is nice and clean. There's no bearings that wore into it, so we know that everything's been pretty healthy with the clutch setup. So there's just a little bit of standard shaft popping through the flywheel. Now, again, there's some controversy as well on how to get these off. The easiest way that I've found, and yes, there's a semi-special tool that I use, and it's called a hammer. This is a special kind of hammer though. These are made by Grace USA, made in the United States, and they're a great manufacturer of all different kinds of tools. And the reason why I choose this mainly is notice the color. This is made out of soft copper. They also make different sizes and style brass hammers, which I use a lot. This is the number 8. I have a smaller style brass and a larger style brass than this too. You want a soft type of material that will not hurt the aluminum flywheel surface. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very lightly tap it to break that friction off of that collet down inside. I have flywheel pullers and bearing pullers, all the bits of fanciness, but honestly, it's quick and easy to use the soft copper hammer. Tap it lightly around the circumference of the flywheel. Doing that and with that hammer, I've never caused any damage. And so when you find something that's simple, it's easy and effective, then that's what you tend to continue to use. So I'm going to take my copper hammer and very lightly work it around until you break that collet free. And then there you go. Those were just a few soft hits on the back side of the flywheel. Notice no damage. The copper is very soft, and that's the whole point, is that it's softer than the aluminum, and so you're putting a little bit of force on the back side without damaging the flywheel. This whole thing will get cleaned up and ready to go back onto this engine when it is refreshed. So we're getting closer here. We've got our collet. I've mentioned in different videos, there's that opening in the collet. You can get a flathead screwdriver and you do a little twisting action and you just kind of work that collet off. Seems to be the easiest way to do it. And there is one shim on the back. Depending on your bell spacing to your transmission gears will depend on how many shims or what size shims that you need to move this forward and back, because effectively you're moving the flywheel forward or back to get the teeth line up and spacing correct. This is, let's measure it. This is a 7. I'm going to call that probably an 11 by 0.8 shim. Let's take a look at the front bearing. Notice there's no real oil. And so this bearing has not been leaking or seeping at all. And so we should have some confidence that the bearings themselves may be worn, but at least that front bearing is doing okay. Let's go ahead and take the carburetor off. This uses a standard 6mm nut on there. So there's one of those bump start heatsink style HPI engine mounts. And now that I'm looking at it, I don't know if the camera will show this, but there is a machined bevel here on the edge. That bevel provides clearance for the inside between the flange, the engine mount flange, and the block itself. And you want that bevel, if you're not familiar, to be on the upside and on the inside, so it misses that inside corner. So that's just a little installation tip if you're not familiar with these particular engine mounts. So now we're getting a lot closer, aren't we? Remember, I am going to be doing a full refresh on this engine, so I'm not 100% worried about dirt, grime getting inside of the carburetor hole or down inside of the sleeve. I just don't want to rotate the crank a whole lot, so that if I did get something down inside of there, it's not going to score the lining. Let's go ahead and pop off this back plate. Back plate was a little stuck. Notice we have a nice colored sheen, and that's from the combusted fuel and oil. This uses a paper style kind of gasket on the back, no O-ring. This is a semi-interference back plate. Take a little Q-tip, clean Q-tip. I'm just going to wipe the inside of the sleeve, make sure there's no dirt and debris so I can move the crank a little bit. Nice and smooth action. And I always wonder, I think to myself and kind of laugh, how many Q-tips am I going to use this year? Feel free to comment down below how many you use during a year's period. I use thousands for lots of different reasons, for engines, for cleaning, for the cars themselves, just a lot. So we're going to heat this up, we're going to break it down, we're going to clean up the entire block and all of the internals, and we'll come back to the engine rebuild area here and continue on with the adventure. Now that we have everything cleaned up, we're ready to start doing some assembly. We were already able to take out the torch and put in our bearings. We have a chrome steel front bearing, which is a 7x19x5, and we have a brand new ceramic bearing in the rear dressing this OS 15 CVR up with a 10 by 19 by 5 ceramic. Happy after it cleaned up. The head's in not too bad a shape. The crank cleaned up nicely. Just used some 2 and 3,000 grit sandpaper on these journals and on the rod journal. Cleaned up nice. We'll do an extensive overview and take a look at the design of the crank, the block, etc. when we do the future episode of the OS 15 CVR engine. Back plate cleaned up nicely. Got a nice matte aluminum color now to everything. One thing that I tried this time, and I don't know if I would recommend or not, but I want to pass on this information to you in case someone's curious. So, like I mentioned, this block, or this engine rather, is 19 years old, and we're doing a refresh. Not a rebuild, but a refresh on it. So, but I use something called aluminum brightener. It's supposed to be made for non-polished aluminum cast surfaces like full-scale intake manifolds, engine blocks, transmission housings, etc. And I wanted to try it on this block because if you recall, when the block was really dirty, it was pretty tarnished and had a bunch of gunk on it. But because of over the years of all the heat cycles, all the oil, etc., it left a patina on there. And I wanted to try to do just that, brighten it up without doing a full polish on the block. I've done that. You will see a fully polished block of another OS engine at a later time, a future episode, a future engine overview. But this one, I didn't want to do a full polish. So I wanted to try out this aluminum brightener. And I don't know if I have mixed feelings about it. It made the surface more matte and more uniform with the patina. It even started to, I don't know if I want to use the right word, like darken. It didn't really darken, but more of the polished surfaces. It made it more of a gray tone instead of like a polished color. So I don't know if it truly actually brightened it up. It made it more uniform with the patina. So I don't know. It's a 19-year-old engine coming up on 20 years old. We're doing a refresh, and it's perfectly clean and perfectly usable, and it still looks nice, so we're going to head and go with it. But it did make me think about something. Maybe if anybody is familiar with bluing liquid for metals, maybe on a future episode we can strip down a block and we can do bluing. And if you're not familiar with bluing, what it does is it is an oxidizer, but it turns everything black or very dark gray. And so that would be curious to do a block, make it from silver to black, and with some bluing. So I don't know, that's just something curious to consider and something to think about. So we've got our bearings in, front and back. Let's go ahead and get this thing assembled, and we'll go ahead and talk about some features along the way. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've done. So after these 19-something years, I didn't believe it. I thought we'd have zero pinch even though we had some good compression. But this sleeve still has some life in it. So we still have decent pinch. And I want to talk about something that a lot of people may not be aware or may not understand. One thing is that it may not go all the way to the top and push through, but it's possible for it to not have enough pinch to have a proper running engine. One way that I like to at least reassure myself of proper pinch is what you do is you take a look at your exhaust window, whether it's a rear exhaust or side exhaust, and you put in your piston in the similar orientation going into the sleeve, and you push it up to where it stops. It needs to be clean. You have to lubricate it. And what you need to do is look at this bottom lip, the bottom portion of the exhaust window, when it's pushed up and it's lubed and clean, and you hold it up to a light, and if you do not see a gap and it looks like you have pinch up top, then you still have enough good pinch going on for the engine. If you push up that piston and you see a gap, then more than likely you're going to have blow by, and you do not have enough pinch up top to have a successfully running engine. Or if you do, you're running solely on compression, and it's just a matter of time for the engine to wear itself out completely. So that's something just to keep in mind. So, but because we have pinch, and I'm kind of flabbergasted, honestly, we went ahead and we cleaned everything up. We're going to utilize the exact same stock rod. Maybe the next time we pull this apart, we'll do some knife edge work on the connecting rod. But the fitment between that upper bushing and the wrist pin is good. The piston itself looks nice. When you're cleaning up your pistons, something that I've heard before, you never want to touch the sides of your piston or any of the piston itself with any type of sandpaper or emery cloth or Scotch-Brite or anything. You can take off some microns, some small fractions of millimeter of the surface, and you will lose the fitment between your sleeve and your piston. Also, a lot of times there's a thin coating on the pistons, and you want to leave that alone. So only rubbing alcohol, in my opinion. You let it soak overnight, or at least 8 hours, depending on how much grime and grit is on it, how much gum up from the fuel is on it. Use your fingers. You can use a soft toothbrush with rubbing alcohol, or I like to use some foaming Dawn spray on all the components to get some of the grease off as well, but only after you soak it in rubbing alcohol. But nothing abrasive on your pistons, nothing abrasive on the inside of your sleeve. But the piston and the pin, wrist pin, and the connecting rod is good. The only thing I noticed, and it doesn't surprise me, is that there is a little bit of wear on this bottom journal to the rod journal inside on the crank. But it's nothing significant that I feel like I need to replace the connecting rod, but it is at that borderline point of do you do it, do you not do it. But because we went ahead and refreshed everything, and we are now going to be reusing the piston and sleeve, I'm going to go ahead and keep that connecting rod in there, and when this formally wears out, its pinch wears out, we'll do a full replacement of everything and rebuild this engine as new. So let's take a look at the sleeve. Normally I would not show you this because this is not a full overview episode of the 15 CVR, but because this special 19-year-old plus engine has survived and it still has usable pinch, we went ahead and did some modification. We went ahead and put a fang here. We beveled the transfer port. We went ahead and redid the entire lower bevel a little bit more extreme so that we have good positive flow around the sleeve and getting inside of the transfer ports. Here, take a look. This is a nice fang here on this transfer port. All of these are done by hand, so none of them are going to be 100% perfect, but I do my best, as everybody does. And this should give this freshed up 15 CVR a nice boost. Talking about boost, take a look at our boost port now. So we beveled that lower edge, we exaggerated the bevel going into the boost port there, and we have some nice fangs now going on into this boost port. This is going to be a nice update for this sleeve and for this engine, and I'm looking forward to getting it reassembled and back into the car and seeing what it'll do. On side exhaust engines, unless you want to actually change your port timing of your exhaust window, I leave the side exhaust sleeves alone. because generally speaking, they're as big and as open as you're going to get it. So nice fangs, nice big bevels on the transfer ports, nice big lower bevel on the bottom of the sleeve, some nice gnarly fangs on the boost port, and she is ready to go to the races. And the sleeve got a full cleanup and polish, and I'm excited to put this back in to the engine. So let's get our piston, let's lube it up, get some oil down in on the wrist pin, and continue putting this engine back together. There's an indicator pin here on top, but if it doesn't, or it's worn out on your engine, on these side exhaust engines, you just want to do your best to get your exhaust port inside of your exhaust window over there. Slide that sleeve right back down in there. This is one of those cases where you take care of your engines, you take care of your tools, you take care of your cars, and they will take care of you. And you can have a 19-plus-year-old engine still running well and ready to go back into the car for some more fun. We have a brand new head shim and exhaust gasket. Let's take these out. And something curious that I have not known, or maybe this engine's unique, I don't know, but I'm swapping out all the hardware to stainless hardware like I like to do on a lot of my engines. This is the backplate bolt, and this particular engine had a 7mm M2.5 bolt for these backplates. That to me is strange. Normally it's a 6, sometimes it's an 8, but this is an oddball 7mm in length. And so I've got 6mm, I have 8mm length, so I took an 8mm and I ground it down to 7mm, did a nice chamfer to get these bolts prepared so that when it goes inside of those threads, there's the same or equivalent thread engagement that the stock bolts have, so that we can put it right back the way that she belongs. Remember, you don't have to crank down on your backplate bolts. They're just an M2.5, but you do need to get them nice and snug, and in time with experience, you'll know about how tight to get them. So we have our head. Like I've shown before, I like to put a little bit of oil in that little well or galley. And what that little bit of oil does is when you put your head shim down inside, it helps to keep it in there. We have our stainless hardware. These are M2.5 also, but these are 12mm in length. There we go. Now she's coming together, isn't she? We have our cleaned up pinch bolt. Put just a little bit of oil on it. And let's take out this brand new 10C slide carburetor for this engine here. Cut her open. Just put a little bit of oil down inside. A little bit on the neck. Give it a little wiggle. Now when I install this, we'll have to take this back off and we'll have to adjust the arm pull ball here, etc. Set our gap. But for now, we'll get her down inside. Nice fitment there. Go to our 6mm nut here. And just do a slight little tweak so she doesn't come off. And here she is. Look how beautiful. This OS 19 plus, almost 20-year-old OS 15 CVR. We're going to mate that back up with the exhaust here, the V1 Paris ribbed pipe. We got it all cleaned up. Brand new black coupler. Take a look at the surface of the header, did a little bit of cleaning and repair, and we went ahead and did a little bit of port matching as well. Nothing extreme, but this hole was a lot smaller. We went ahead and opened it up, had a nice little taper now down inside so we can have some nice good flow, as well as stoning the surface here of the header flange so we can have a nice good seal on the engine. So if you enjoyed this partial engine overview on the Purple RS4 with the OS 15 CVR with a refresh and now modified sleeve, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you like 10 scale, nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be. And thanks for taking the adventure with me.